Welcome to The Growth Show with me as your host, Joe Camerato. I am an entrepreneur who created my company, National Business Capital, from literally $0 out of my spare bedroom to over $2 billion in business loans secured for entrepreneurs nationwide. Since 2007, I have seen just about every type of business. I provide money and help entrepreneurs access capital to scale fast, but I also know that it's possible for you as you scale to replace yourself, to build systems, processes, and great teams of people that can live on without you so you can actually enjoy your life and your company can still grow. I will not only tell you the peaks and valleys of my story, but I will also bring on world-class entrepreneurs to tell their stories and share their lessons on their growth journeys. Welcome to The Growth Show. Welcome to The Growth Show with me as your host, Joe Camerato. Got a great guest on today who definitely deserves to be on The Growth Show and has really rock and rolled with growing his company and has now moved to helping others grow their companies, which I'm really excited to talk about. I have Lee Benson on today, and Lee grew his first company, Aerospace, from 3 employees to 500 employees with 15 consecutive years of 20% compounded average annual growth before his exit. Next, he founded Execute to Win to help senior leadership teams experience similar results by working better together at improving their organization's most important number. Today, Lee's operating system is used by businesses all over the world. Execute to Win advises many high-growth companies, helping teams uncover their most important number to achieve and identifying the work that drives that number to build their businesses. And he's got a great book out called Your Most Important Number, which has become a Wall Street bestseller. So thank you, Lee, for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Joe. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. You know, as we talked about, my show is all about really featuring amazing entrepreneurs that have, just crushed it and kicked ass in their business. And it seems like you've absolutely done that. And, everyone talks about all the good stuff today, but, when I read about you and hear about all the great successes, I know for sure there was definitely some challenges in there. So definitely we want to hear about the wins, but we also, definitely want to hear about the challenges that you had to overcome and really curious, I'm guessing, but you created this book. Is this from like the learnings, this book, from what you learned in building, Able Aerospace?
Absolutely. I'm actually on my 7th company I've started from scratch. I've had 7, 8, and 9-figure exits. And the book titled Your Most Important Number kind of describes, hey, where did all this start? What did I learn? What worked? What didn't work? And more importantly for me, what are some universal truths that will or won't work for others? And so as I'm growing these different businesses, a couple of them actually closed. They didn't make sense along the way. And I feel like my biggest opportunities are still in the future. I'm still fully in the game. I love doing this work. But when I wrote the book, I remember early on, I was getting amazing results. Things are going great. And my friends, and I had dozens of them in different CEO groups, ask for my operating methodology. How are you doing this? Can you show us how to do it? And I showed everybody how to do it. I had the time to do that. And fast forward a couple of years, and only 2 were left standing doing any part of it. And what I realized is that most CEOs don't have the discipline and drive to really keep what I would call traditional goal setting alive. And traditional goal setting, in my view, does not stand the test of time. Where I remember in the aerospace company had a quality, cost, safety, delivery, and culture goal for every team member. And we cascaded it all the way to the front line. And every month, everyone had to interact with it in a way that would create more value for the organization. But if I backed off even for a second, everybody else would back off.
Yeah.
And I had the discipline to keep it going. Like I could do that. I didn't know very many others that could actually do it. And then I look at a lot of popular operating methodologies. It could be, 40X or OKRs or EOS or scaling up. There's a lot of them out there, and they deploy traditional goal setting. And so the process is every quarter-ish, create 1 to 3 goals, get it approved by your manager, rinse and repeat. And what does that feel like for the employees? One, but two, when I go into an organization and I audit the goals, 95% of the goals just aren't that thoughtful. And they're not connected to really creating value. And I hear a lot of CEOs say everybody's hitting their goals, but the company isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so out of all of that, I developed what I call the MIND methodology, which stands for most important number and drivers. And this is something that's been catching fire on its own within teams, within companies. And it's so much more effective and powerful than traditional goal setting in my experience.
That's great. And what's the best way to identify your most important number?
Yeah, the way the concept works is that every organization has one number that above all others says they're winning or losing the game. It's a measure of the value of the organization, and it will drive the majority of the right behaviors. So in the for-profit world, which is probably a lot of, if not most of your listeners, it's going to be profit or cash flow if it's a capital intensive business. And then as you start bolting teams together within the organization, you might have, HR, finance, marketing, sales, product delivery, service, et cetera. They all have a most important number that says above all others, they're winning or losing and will drive the majority of the right behaviors. So all of these bolt on and pick a function, whether it's sales or marketing or HR. There is that one number. They may measure 10 or 20 or 50 other things, but they're only measuring those other things to help them make better decisions to improve their most important number, which is the measure of the value that their team is creating. And so it's a really simple process to go through. If I'm on a team, I can say, that's the score of the game. That tells us whether we're winning or losing at any point in time. We started the year here, we're going there, we're on track, at risk, or behind, or maybe we're overdriving. And this is the best work that I'm doing or my team is doing to improve that number and keep us on track. So very simply, it just bolts all of these teams' most important numbers together. Regardless if you have one team because you're a small company or you have hundreds of teams because you're a larger company.
Yeah. Can you give an example of creating this number for whether it was one of the companies you worked in or one of the companies you've worked with, just like a real live example, so maybe the audience understands what you mean, by this number?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important job for a CEO or founder or president of an organization is to continually increase the value of the organization over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yep.
So what would that number be? Now, if you want to be positioned to sell at any point in time for the most possible money, maybe EBITDA is the most important number, even though you never intend to sell, but you never know what can happen with life, right? So that could be the most important number. Now, that would drive the behaviors of all of the other senior leaders. Now we start to go out in the organization. Let's say you have 50 or 100 employees. You probably have an HR department. And so let's walk through that, which I think is such a great example of coming up with the most important number. What would be the number that says HR is winning or losing? And typically what they say when we start this conversation, and again, the team has to come up with it, they'll say, well, it's retention or engagement.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, the obvious. Yep.
Okay, well, let's play that out, because the second half of this is it has to drive the majority of the right behaviors. So let's pick retention. And here we go. You hired me. I'm running HR. I have 3 years later, 95% retention. I kept everybody. It's incredible. Nobody's ever done this before.
Is that a good thing? Yeah.
Yeah. Never mind that 70 or 80% of the team members cannot achieve the outcome-based responsibilities that are required for the role that they're filling. And so that didn't drive the majority of the right behavior. So a better, most important number, and the best that I can think of, is the percentage of seats filled with capable people. So every role is clearly defined. Here's 2 to 4 max outcome-based responsibilities that are measurable that they need to achieve. And then here's a list of maybe 20 capabilities they need to have to achieve those outcomes. what percentage of all team members are delivering or over delivering, and what percentage are under delivering on those. And now we're driving all the right behaviors. We're hiring better, we're training better, we're providing leaders with better tools to help all of their team members achieve the outcomes that they need to achieve. So, and you can go to one department to the next, sales, marketing, for marketing, every business is so different, right? But generally speaking, it's about generating qualified leads. What is a qualified lead? All qualified leads aren't created equal. And so you have this whole conversation. How do you do that better and better and better over time? But there's a couple of short examples there of coming up with the most important number. The next part of that is drivers. What are the categories of work that each team should be really good at leveraging to improve their most important number? And we call those drivers. They're evergreen, continuous improvement work that a team is doing.
That makes sense. I like that. And the HR one is definitely an interesting one, right? Because I think if you ask most organizations how are you measuring that, I don't think they would really even have an answer. I don't even think most people are. And the obvious is retention, but keeping everybody just to keep people is not a good thing, especially if they're not being effective. And that's a real interesting one. So it definitely makes sense.
Well, engagement, right? Think about that. Engaged with what?
Yeah, and even if they're engaged, but if they're not effective for the organization, or capable,
Yeah.
or hitting their own numbers that they need to hit, if it's a sales department or whatever, and that's a tough one. I think as companies grow, because you start, most companies typically start off small and it's family like, and then as it expands, it all becomes harder to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got personalities and relationships and emotion that come into play. But, the reality is, it's hard for a lot of people, I think, to separate that. And as the business really grows, it does really come down to numbers. I mean, you have to have compassion and empathy. And I think we have a really good culture around that. But at the end of the day, if you don't hit your numbers, and I say this to my team, if you don't hit your numbers, then we're not going to have this great place to come to every day. So you've got to be focused. You've got to be focused on your numbers and growing and driving the business.
Well, and that concept is tough for most because they'll say, well, it can't be just about the money. You don't care about people. Well, if your job as a top leader in an organization is to continually increase the value of the organization, there is going to be a measure that shows that, and everything else is subordinate. If you don't get the people part right and all these other things, then you're going to limit your ability to increase the value of the organization.
And to that point, because again, it's like, oh, you don't care about people, but well, is that true? Because if you do care about people and your people, then you have to constantly build a great business in order to be able to afford and continue to pay people. And if you don't grow and you don't hit numbers, you don't generate profit, then you don't exist. And I think it's funny. I think a lot of CEOs are afraid to actually talk about it like that. We talk about that in our business. We're transparent with that. I think a lot of organizations are afraid to talk about being profitable and hitting numbers and winning, but the reality is, if you don't, then you're not there. And if you do care about your people, then you have to care about the numbers. So it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, concept.
Well, here's the big difference in my view. It's not about a number. What it's about for me is creating a value creation culture. We're here to continually create more value for all stakeholders. There's material value for sure. There's emotional energy value where, wow, this is fun and we're elevating that and it's incredible. There's spiritual value, and that means something different to everybody. But what's that combination? And it's value that we're creating for all stakeholders, our customers, the team members, the shareholders, et cetera. And that's the game. It's a value creation culture, and we're all running at it. And I think it solves for the problem of all you care about is money, which in my view, when people talk about stuff like that, it's just pure virtue signaling, right? Yeah, there's a big difference between actual virtue and virtue signaling. And this is about creating value for all stakeholders, and everybody should be in the game. And I think our job, and I just learned this over the years, is to create this incredible value creation culture environment, an operating methodology, rules of engagement that everybody's continually growing and improving their ability to create value. As a team, sometimes they leave and they go create even more somewhere else. And boy, that makes the world truly a better place, as opposed to just virtue signaling about it. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And working with all the different companies and leadership teams and CEOs, where do you think you see you know where most CEOs and leadership teams get stuck or and hit that glass ceiling?
Yeah, so many talk about what should happen and they get really frustrated when it doesn't just happen. And one of the chapters in my book, on strategy, it says, hey, you've created your strategy. Congratulations. You're 3% of the way there. Now, 97% is going to be actually executing on this stuff.
Yeah.
And I talk to leaders regularly. I talked to one this morning that, very frustrated that people don't just do what this particular CEO thinks everybody should do. Well, if they got it at your level, they would all have their own company. So how intentional are you about creating this environment where they learn how to create value? And for example, for any of the listeners here, do you have a definition of what it means to be a leader in your organization?
That's a good one. Everyone wants to create leaders, but what does that mean?
Yeah. And the one
That's a
that
good
I
one.
use and I, most of the organizations I work with actually adopt this, but being a leader in this organization means you get results and you foster an environment where every team member is intrinsically motivated and empowered to create more value over time. That's what it means to be a leader here.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's funny when some of these things are so simple, when you when you hear them and the light bulbs go off for sure, right? Because we all run around and say we want great leaders, but if no one knows what that means, then how do you expect that to actually happen?
And Joe, maybe that's one of the biggest things that leaders miss, the top leader in an organization miss, is that they expect everybody to connect dots that they're not connecting. Like, you should just, like I do, or I know this is possible. I've got this really talented team. How come they're not just making it happen? Well, I would argue because you haven't been super intentional around the operating methodology and the environment from which they're going to create value. As I think about culture, it really is the beliefs, the decisions, the practices, and the accountability from which an organization creates value. So what are the beliefs in your organization that help you grow and create more value, and which ones hurt you? What are the practices that you have in the organization, whether it's meetings that you have, whether it's compensation, maybe it's setting strategy, but all these practices, were they designed to create the most value, or did you just check a box because you wanted to have it in place?
Yeah.
And what about decisions? What is a critical decision and what isn't a critical decision? Have you defined that? A couple of the right decisions can completely change the success trajectory of your organization. And then accountability. What percentage of the time are people doing what they said when they said they would do it? Those are interesting questions, right?
Yeah, no, those are really great questions, and this is really good stuff. What how many successful exits have you had, Lee?
Well, let's see here. So 1, 2, 3 successful exits, 3 that I just shut down, didn't lose much. And the thing that I'm doing today with Execute to Win, we help organizations with this methodology. I also invest in a number of organizations, and I run CEO mastermind groups, and I apply the methodology, and I limit it to 8 members in each one of these groups. And I've got certified chairs that have their own groups as well. But we follow the methodology. It's for CEOs that really want to grow, and they want real help with all of that inside the organization. And in each of these groups, the perspective is hey, this is a conglomerate. We've all metaphorically invested over half of our retirement money in these companies. We want to ensure we get a really good return in retirement. So, what do we want to see? What do we want to know? Where are the risks that aren't being identified so we can get in front of that? And for every one of the members, we have a most important number for the organization, and we track the best work that the CEO should be doing at any point in time to create the most value. And that's going to move around that critical point within their organization. And I think this will ultimately be the most valuable exit that I have someday if I ever want to stop doing it, because I love this work.
That's great. What size are the companies that you work with? Is there like a revenue size requirement, or
It's a mindset requirement. It's a persona of the owner. So I've got some clients that have 4 employees, and I have clients that have over 40,000 employees.
oh wow,
Largest client I'm working with today, they're a public company. They're valued at about $50 billion. But they're all over the place in there. And I love this value creation piece. So even in these CEO groups, mastermind groups that I have, we meet for a full day once a month. And the companies in a group can range from $1 million to $200 million. But the $1 million companies have plans to get to 50 million or over $100 million. And the $200 million ones want to get to the $1 billion mark. And the $200 million CEOs, it's amazing working on their chops, helping a $1 million company get to 25 or $50 million. I mean, there's just value everywhere in here. And when you lean in, this is my experience, lean in to help CEOs grow their businesses in areas that are not your area of expertise, you grow personally and professionally so much faster going through that process. So it's really about the persona, high growth mode, realistic plan, all that kind of stuff. And that's how we choose to engage. And I pick the folks I want to work with in my own personal groups that I have on the CEO side of it. The companies I choose to personally engage with to help them with the mind methodology, where I invest, all of it. But I've got a number of certified consultants, internal and external, that do this work as well.
that's great. That's exciting. I think getting a part of these groups, like I joined YPO 7 years ago. It's different than what you're doing, but I think getting a part of a group, mastermind with other motivated entrepreneurs, it's extremely powerful. And I tell people all the time, whether to join YPO or anything, like just do something. You should. It's been a game changer for me. In my forum to be around, motivated entrepreneurs that want to get to the next level and don't settle for, anything less. It's been a big part of my growth, and it's
Yeah, Joe, I've been part of groups with overlap for 40 years, Vistage and Renaissance and McKay, and I've been part of a lot of stuff going on with YPO and EO. And I think I love the group part of it. Everything you just said, I think is fantastic. The opportunity that they're missing is they have a superficial problem and they have a process problem. And the superficial problem is you can't see deeply enough into each other's business to truly help them. So when they come to a meeting and say, this is the thing I want to work on, 90% plus of the time, it's a symptom of something else they should be working on, that caused it. And in this particular approach, in our Execute CEO mastermind groups, we can see so deeply into everybody's company, and there's software I've developed where I hold all this together and everybody can see all of it. That never happens, and everything stays on point to what do you need to be doing to increase the value of your organization today, and move that around at any point in time. And then they also have a process problem where you come to the meeting and present your thing you want to talk about. Everybody asks a clarifying question, then they give you their idea of a solution. You move on, and some of these groups can be 18 people, and maybe once every year and a half you get to give a little presentation on your company. So I love the community piece that you're talking about, but if you're in high growth mode and you really want to improve the value of your business and accelerate that over time, those other groups don't nearly as effectively do it as they could. Does that resonate at all, Joe?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. It's only you're only able to get so deep, and and everyone's form is ran a little bit differently, so it all depends on the form. But
Mm-hmm.
definitely structure around knowing your number and keep it on track. Um, I could see that being really powerful, having that, within a group. And if everyone knows that, if you're coming to the group with a bunch of BS, people can put you back on track because it's taking you away from, hitting your number. So yeah,
Totally.
that's really, it's an interesting, concept. Um, Great. That's awesome. So what do you think has been like one of the biggest contributors to your growth, and success? I know you've shared a lot of stuff. You've created this awesome book, and you have definitely some proven processes, which I think is amazing. But for you, like, what do you think's been a biggest contributor outside of knowing your number, to your growth?
Yeah, it's really a journey, and I think about the first year with what ended up being a sale of a couple of different aerospace companies to Textron Aerospace. The first year we almost went out of business almost monthly. Like, it was just so hard, and I never raised any outside equity capital at all. It was whatever we sold, and that's what we lived on. And I had credit cards, and all the uphill and the snow both ways, the story type stuff. And then we got to a place where we were kind of stuck, and some leaders were getting great results, some leaders weren't. Well, what were these leaders doing that those weren't doing? And I came up with, three categories, leadership, like how you show up, who you are. And then the second was foundational readiness, your ability to put the things in place to be able to grow and create value faster. And then third was operating methodology. So what are the consistent things you do that cause great results to happen? And then I held all leaders accountable to that. And then we just got unstuck and we kept growing. And then it was this whole concept of, well, we're here to create value. How do we know we're creating value? So when you ask a leader in the organization or a non-supervisor employee, how do you create value for the company? If they give you a job description, then there's an opportunity. You missed it. And they should be able to be really clear about how a leader and a non-supervisory team member actually create value that advances the value of the total enterprise. So it's this journey from working really hard and trying not to go out of business, to this value creation culture and harmonizing all team members, all teams, all efforts to continually increase the value of the organization. The only way to do that is to continually increase the value that you create for every team member, the customers, stakeholders, shareholders, et cetera, across the board. So there's not one thing. It's just the evolution in the direction of creating this, for lack of a better way of saying it, value creation culture.
How did you figure this out? Did you have a mentor? Did you have someone that helped you with this? Did you just start, putting focus on it?
Yeah, I believe if you apply math, common sense, logic, facts, and reason to creating more and more value over time, you'll just go down the same road, past the same road signs, insights, and everything else, and you will evolve into and make all this stuff happen. Even when I met Jack Welch for the first time, it was in 2008. I attended one of his 2.5-day courses on his management philosophy, and they limited it to 100 people. We all paid 10 grand to sit in the room. And I was the smallest company. I was coming off a $10 million a year, way smaller than when I sold it in 2016. And every table had to state their mission and values. And mine was the first table called on, and these billion-dollar companies around the table didn't know what their mission and values were, but I knew mine. I mean, we were fully in, and I went through that, and there was this long, uncomfortable silence. And Jack said, "That's perfect. I wouldn't change anything." And as he went around the room, I realized why he hesitated, because everybody else had marketing slogans, nothing that employees and team members could really sink their teeth into. And we go to lunch on the first day, and he sits next to me, and he blew off his table where people were all selected to sit with him. And he said, "I've done this thousands of times. Nobody's ever gotten it right till you. How the hell did you do it?" And I said the same thing I just said. Well, if you apply reason, math, common sense, logic, and all this to creating more value, we're going to go down the same path. So I'm doing it with my company, and I can see the path to 100 million and beyond. You are running the most valuable company in the world. at over $400 billion in market cap and probably 400,000 employees at the peak. But what's the difference? We're all just a bunch of teams trying to create value. And, and he and we hit it off. I mean, he became a great friend. And I was so sorry, when he passed. And we had lots of discussions around this stuff.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really, I always love hearing, the stories, and I guess it's amazing how much is in your control and what you can create or not create, and I think sometimes that's a big miss from a lot of entrepreneurs is I don't think everyone realizes how much power we actually can create, have, at our fingertips, if we're willing to, put the work in and actually take the time to stop and think.
Well, I think you nailed it there. And the thing in my brain is always you can start anywhere and go everywhere, because what was the seed that was planted that became Able Aerospace? What 100% of what we did that first year was less than 0.002% of what we did when I sold the company. And so when CEOs or founders say, I just need to be in a different business with more potential, what I'm hearing is they've given up on creating value. They think it'll just happen if they happen to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not true. You can take what you have and turn it into $1 trillion company. Theoretically, it may not be the same thing and likely won't be, but you can do that. And so what's holding you back from doing it? And this kind of goes to belief structure. What's helping you and hurting you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, really, really good stuff. Well, I definitely appreciate all said, here today. And it was, a privilege to hear your story. And, how can people, find you, Lee, learn more about your current company and the book?
Yeah, absolutely. My website, our website for Execute to Win is really simple. It's etw.com. You can learn about the Execute Mastermind groups there. You can order the book there, although you can get the book in 40,000 different channels. And you can book a call to talk about having us help you implement the MIND methodology within your organization.
Great stuff. And everyone on the show, we all end with one growth tip that you would like to share with fellow entrepreneurs watching this. What would be a growth tip that you would share to everybody?
I would say that the biggest limiting factor in every organization is the leader at the top. Keep developing personally and professionally so you become less and less of a limiting factor.
Good stuff. I love it. Thank you so much for being on the show, Lee. Really good stuff today. All goes back into everything that we talk about on the Grow Show. So definitely a great episode today. And thanks everyone for listening. Keep doing what you're doing in your business. And most importantly, keep growing.